This video was sponsored by Card Kingdom. You can pre-order all the cards you see in this video by using my link in the description below. Hi everyone, I'm Neat Sahone, and today I'm bringing you my Archetype guide for March of the Machine Limited. In this video, I'll go through each of the two color combinations and talk about what each of those color pairs is trying to do in this limited format in terms of synergy. This isn't a video where I'm going to talk about the biggest bombs or the premium removal unless they happen to have synergy within one of these decks. So if you're interested in my thoughts about that sort of thing, I did do a set review where I covered literally every card in the set and gave you my thoughts on them. And the purpose of this video is to talk about the synergies and how they work within each color pair. So let's dive in with our look at our first color pair. I wanted to start with red-green because it's the color pair that's about the new card type, which is battles. Each color pair in this format has at least one signpost uncommon. Most of them have two, and a few of them you could argue even have three. And a signpost uncommon, by the way, is an uncommon that is in those exact two colors that sort of tells you what you want to be doing. So here we have Rampaging Geoderm as our primary signpost uncommon. It's a 4-mana 3/3 with trample and haste, and when it attacks, an attacking creature gets +1/+1 until end of turn, but if you're attacking a battle, you put a +1/+1 counter on it instead. So it basically says you want to be attacking battles if you can. There's also a battle signpost uncommon, which several of the color pairs have. Every color pair actually has an uncommon battle, but not all of them are really synergistic with what the deck's trying to do. This one is, though that's not immediately evident on the front. All it does is let you discard a card and draw a card and make a treasure. But if you attack it down, and you're going to be good at doing that because this is going to be the best deck for attacking battles because of cards like Rampaging Geoderm, if you attack it down, you cast it as Truga Cliffcharger, which when it enters the battlefield, you can discard a card and search your library for a land or battle. So it can help you find a battle so that you can attack it and get even more value. So how do you go about defeating battles? What are our payoffs for attacking them? Well, we've got the Geoderm. There's also Onake Javelineer, which is less of a payoff, but it can tap and do 2 damage to a player or a battle. So it gives you a way to defeat battles without even attacking. You've got Thrashing Frontliner, which gets +1/+1 when it attacks a battle. War Trained Slasher, which doubles its power when it attacks a battle. War Historian, which gains Indestructible when it attacks a battle. You've got Portent Tracker, which can ramp your mana, but you can also tap it and use it to remove a counter from a battle or add one. So this one can help you defeat battles, but it can also make it harder for your opponent to defeat them, which is nice. There's also cards like Cosmic Hunger, which lets you do direct damage to battles. Red-Green has several of these, and a couple of them are fight effects like this one. And there's even a battle that lets you do direct damage, potentially, to battles. And it's pretty sweet because it can sort of keep this chain going where you continue to have creatures get better when they attack battles. And eventually the value you get out of flipping battles is just too much. There's also Wildwood Escort, which can allow you to return a battle from your graveyard to your hand. It can also return creatures, but it ends up here because of the battle part. There are a couple of rares that fit in well here. Into the Fire can do 2 damage to each creature, planeswalker, and battle, so it can help you defeat battles. And then Rampaging Raptor is a 4-mana 4/4 trample and haste, and it can sort of do the Questing Beast thing, except Questing Beast hits planeswalkers. With this, you can just attack your opponent with it, hit them, and then also do that much damage to one of their battles that they're defending. So that's red-green. It's about battles. Blue-green is about transforming things. You've got Mutagen Connoisseur as your primary signpost uncommon. It gets +1/+0 for each transformed permanent you control. So this will key off of all of the permanents in the format that transform, which includes battles, but it also includes incubator tokens, which are tokens that transform into creatures, and it includes all of the cards that can transform using phyrexian mana. So there's basically 3 big elements of this format that this color pair can key off of in blue-green. And Mutagen Connoisseur is so cheap that even at 1 power, you're going to feel great. And if you can get it bigger, it's a lot better. Invasion of Pyrulia is your battle uncommon. It lets you look at the top 3 cards of your library, scry 3. And if you reveal the top card and it's a land or double-faced card, meaning a battle or one of these Phyrexian transformation creatures, you get to draw the card. So this wants you to put a battle or other transforming card on top. And if you can attack it down, it transforms into Gargantuan Slabhorn, which gives other transformed permanents you control, trample, and ward 2. You have a few payoffs at common and uncommon for this, in addition to the signpost. You've got Corruption of Tawashi, which is maybe the most build-aroundy of all of these. It incubates 4, so it gives you one of those incubator tokens. And then anytime a permanent you control transforms, or a permanent enters the battlefield under your control transformed, you get to draw a card. It only triggers once a turn, but it gives you a body that transforms up front, so it works well with the deck. Oculus Whelp lets you draw a card when it dies if you have a transformed permanent. Omen Hawker can make mana to be spent on activated abilities. This can be used to transform the creatures that use Phyrexian mana. And Overgrown Pest, when it enters the battlefield, you look at the top 5 of your library, and you reveal a land or a double-faced card and put it into your hands. So it's a lot better if you are in this deck than it is in other decks, because you reach a point in most games where you don't really want to hit a land anymore. So what you need is a critical mass of double-faced cards, which this deck already is wanting you to go for. Let's move now to Black-White, where the theme is Phyrexians. You've got Sculpted Perfection as your primary signpost uncommon. It incubates when it enters the battlefield, and all of your Phyrexians get +1/+1. The signpost uncommon battle here doesn't actually say the word Phyrexian on the front, but when it enters the battlefield, you can sacrifice an artifact or creature, and when you do, you exile an artifact or creature an opponent controls. This works well with the incubator tokens that something like Sculpted Perfection makes, because even if you don't transform them, you can sack them to this. And then, if you can transform this battle, it becomes an equipment that really likes it if all your creatures have the same creature type, because when the equipped creature attacks, you put a +1/+1 counter on that creature, and each other creature you control it shares a creature type with it. So you can see how that works with this Phyrexian tribal theme. So what are the payoffs here at common and uncommon? Well, you've got Gift of Completion, which itself incubates, so it gives you a Phyrexian, and when a Phyrexian you control dies, you surveil 1. You've got Phyrexian Awakening, which is a lot like Gift of Completion. It gives you an incubate token and then does something for all Phyrexians, in this case gives them vigilance. You've got Norn's Inquisitor, which incubates, but then also anytime a permanent you control transforms into a Phyrexian, you put a counter on it. This will include these incubator tokens, as well as the other cards in the set that can transform into Phyrexians. All of the cards that use Phyrexian mana to transform into Phyrexians. Phyrexian Censor, which has an effect that hates on decks that don't have a bunch of Phyrexian things in them, because non-Phyrexian creatures enter tapped, and each player can't cast more than one non-Phyrexian spell each turn. You've also got Attentive Sky Warden, which when it deals combat damage to a player or battle can allow you to transform an incubator for free. And Seraph of New Capenna, this is one of these Phyrexian mana transformers I'm talking about. On the front side, it's just a 3-mana 2/2 flyer, but when it transforms, you can sack creatures or artifacts, which again can include untransformed incubate tokens, and it gets +2/+1 if you sacrifice one. There are some rares that fit in nicely here, including Bloated Processor, which can sack Phyrexians for +1/+1 counters. It also incubates when it dies. Grafted Butcher, which gives you a Phyrexian Lord that also gives all your Phyrexians menace when it enters, and it can come back from the graveyard if you sack an artifact or a creature. Progenitor Exarch, which can make a whole bunch of Phyrexian tokens and also tap to transform them. You've also got a card from the Multiverse Legends bonus sheet that is excellent here. And Taza Karlov, she'll give all of your Phyrexian incubator tokens Vigilance and Lifelink, which is powerful. And if you happen to have one of the cards that makes tokens when it dies, you'll get 2 of them because she doubles death triggers. She doubles all death triggers, by the way, but she's particularly nasty if she's doubling something like Bloated Processor, because the tokens will have Vigilance and Lifelink. You've also got Elesh Norn, whose transformation involves a bunch of incubate tokens, and she likes it if you've gone wide with incubators already, and she doesn't kill Phyrexians with the Chapter 3. Obviously, Elesh Norn's going to be amazing in any white deck, but she has enough synergy here. Also, she wants you to sacrifice things, and this deck will be good at doing that. She has enough synergy here that I thought including her made sense. There is another deck that's interested in incubator tokens, and that's Black-Green, where Elvish Vat Keeper is our signpost uncommon. There isn't a signpost battle here that fits in well with this particular archetype, but you do have the Vat Keeper that when it comes into play incubates, and you can transform incubator tokens you control for 5 mana and double the number of counters on them. You have some common and uncommon payoffs, including the Gift of Completion we already saw. We've also got Tangled Skyline, which gives you an Incubate 5 token, and Phyrexians you control have Reach. And you have Dina Soul Steeper from the Multiverse Legends sheet. She's sort of a second signpost uncommon. Some of the colors have a card in Multiverse Legends that is a little more signposty. She's not perfectly aligned with what this deck wants to do, because you're not really gaining that much life, but her ability to sacrifice creatures to buffer power does fit in well with what you're doing here. Some rares that fit in well here. We've already seen the Processor and the Butcher. You've also got Glistening Dawn, which generates 2 huge Incubate tokens, and Glissa, Herald of Predation, who can give all Phyrexians First Strike and Death Touch, and she can transform Incubators for free, and she can incubate. So she can really do it all on her own. Let's move now to Blue-Black, which is a mill deck, and this time around it's about milling yourself and your opponent. And you even like milling your opponent perhaps a little bit more than you like milling yourself, but most of the cards in the format are symmetrical mill cards that mill both players. So your Signpost Uncommon, first up is Halo Forager. When it enters the battlefield, you can pay X, and when you do, you can cast an instant or sorcery from a graveyard with mana value X without paying its mana cost, and that's key here. A lot of the cards say from a graveyard, when normally in most limited formats, if we have a graveyard deck or a self-mill deck, it usually says your graveyard. But in this format, they're mostly more flexible. They say any graveyard. And so that makes something like Halo Forager a lot more potent when you play it alongside a bunch of symmetrical mill cards. Like the Signpost Uncommon Battle, which is Invasion of Amonkhet. When it enters the battlefield, each player mills 3 cards, then each opponent discards a card and you draw a card. So this fits in great here, and if you can transform it, it becomes Lazotep Convert, which can become a copy of any creature card in a graveyard, except it's a 4/4. So again, the more cards that are in both graveyards, the better these cards get because you have more options. So payoffs, we of course have Halo Forager and Lazotep Convert. There's also Nezumi Freewheeler, which has one of these symmetrical mill effects when it enters, and you can transform it. Interestingly, it's sort of a black-white card, but you can play these Phyrexian mana cards in any deck, and it's probably going to be a little better here, because this is the deck that cares about milling both players like this, and when it transforms, it becomes a creature that can get back a permanent with mana value 2 or less from a graveyard. So it might have a black-white identity, but it's much better in this deck than it's going to be in black-white. Though admittedly it would be a good card anywhere. You've also got Disturbing Conversion, which mills both players 2 cards and then lowers the power of the enchanted creature based on the number of cards in its controller's graveyard. You've got Flitting Gorilla, which mills both players when it dies, and then you can return a creature or battle to the top of your library. Halo Charged Scob mills both players when it enters, and then you put an instant sorcery or battle from your graveyard on top of your library. Tenured Oilcaster gets +3/+0 if you have 8 or more cards in your opponent's graveyard, and whenever it attacks or blocks, it mills both players. Unseal the Necropolis mills both players 3 cards, and then you get 2 creatures from your graveyard to your hand. And Expedition Lookout is a 2-mana 2/3 with Defender that loses Defender when your opponent has 8 or more cards in their graveyard. Ichor Drinker is good if you mill it because you can still get an Incubate token out of it. You've also got a card from the bonus sheet that works fairly well here in Rona Sheoldred's Faithful. She makes all your spells make your opponent lose 1 life, but she can also come back from the graveyard if you discard 2 cards and pay her mana cost. Rares that fit in here include Breach the Multiverse, which mill both players 10 cards, so it'll immediately set up all your threshold stuff. Granted, it costs 7 mana, so it's not like it's a great enabler, but it is powerful. It lets you reanimate a card from each graveyard. Realmbreaker, the Invasion Tree, I think is probably a little too clunky, but if there's a deck for it, it's this one because it mills your opponent and then you steal lands from their graveyard. Sheoldred works really, really well here because she wants your opponent to have 8 or more cards in the graveyard or she can't transform. She's strong enough when she's not transformed, but when she does transform, she's basically an auto win. Sea Double is a modal spell that gives you both options if your opponent has 8 or more cards in their graveyard, and they're both powerful options. Emry, Lurker of the Loch is a card from the Multiverse Legend sheet. Like Realmbreaker, I'm not sure this will actually work, mostly just because the format doesn't have enough artifacts, but it does mill you when it enters, and if you do have a few artifacts, you can constantly recur with her. She is quite powerful. You've also got Sheoldred, Whispering One, which is just a great black creature, but it lets you reanimate things from your graveyard, so I included it here. You've also got Gyruda, Doom of Depths, which mills both players 4 cards when it enters, and then lets you reanimate something with an even mana value from among those milled cards. And you can also play it as your companion, which is pretty sweet. You've also got Sword of Once and Future, which is better if you've already loaded your graveyard because you're more likely to be able to cast spells off of it. So that's blue-black. Green-white, meanwhile, is about +1/+1 counters. We've got Botanical Brawler as our main signpost uncommon. It enters with 2 counters. It's got Trample, and whenever 1 or more counters are put on another permanent you control, if it's the first time +1/+1 counters have been put on that permanent this turn, you put a counter on Botanical Brawler, so it wants you to be putting counters places. It gets huge. Invasion of Moog is your signpost uncommon battle. When it enters, it puts a +1/+1 counter on all of your creatures, making it, I think, one of the more powerful uncommon battles in the set, and it transforms into an amazing creature that puts a counter on a creature you control every upkeep. So you've got Botanical Brawler and Invasion of Moag at uncommon. You've also got Kami of Whispered Hopes, which puts an extra +1/+1 counter on things when counters are put on them, and if you put counters on it, it can ramp more mana, which is pretty sweet. The entire backup mechanic, which is a huge part of this format, works really well with this entire deck, and the same is true of the entire incubate mechanic, which also deals with +1/+1 counters. So there's not like big payoffs for +1/+1 counters the way there might be for other archetypes, but you have a few payoffs, and then you have all of these different ways to put counters on things, ranging from individual cards to 2 of the biggest mechanics in the set. So I think you still have a lot of synergy there. The rares that work well here include Ancient Imperiosaur, enters with a bunch of +1/+1 counters when you convoke it. Archangel Elspeth puts counters on things with her -2. Dusk Legion Duelist and Ozolith are more all in on the +1/+1 counter thing because the Imperiosaur and Elspeth are good in a lot of decks, but the Duelist lets you draw a card when you put a +1/+1 counter on it, and the Ozolith multiplies the +1/+1 counters you put on things, and it can put counters on things itself, so it's sort of a one-man +1/+1 counter factory, or one artifact, I guess. Tribute to the World Tree can put counters on your creatures when they enter. Kenrith the Returned King has a green ability that lets you put counters on things quite efficiently. Lothiel the Bounteous Dawn, if you can combine it with some life gain, then you get a bunch of +1/+1 counters. And you have, a rare with backup and Boonbringer Valkyrie. From the Multiverse Legends sheet, you have Anafenza, which bolsters every time a non-token creature enters the battlefield, which means you get to put a counter on your creature with the lowest toughness. So there are a lot of rare synergy pieces here, maybe fewer at common and uncommon, but I kind of think just being an aggro deck that does a bunch of stuff with counters is probably good enough. Red-White is sort of adjacent to this. It's built around the backup mechanic in particular a little more. Your main signpost uncommon is Mirror Shield Hoplite, which lets you copy a backup ability when one of your creatures becomes the target of one of these backup abilities. The signpost uncommon battle here isn't on the front side immediately about +1/+1 counter things, but it gives 2 creatures +2/+0 in Vigilance and Haste until end of turn, which could allow you to transform it quickly into Valor's Reach Tag Team, which gives you 2/3/2s that gain a +1/+1 counter as long as they attack with something else. So some of the backup stuff that you have going on, you've got the Hoplite. You also have Sunblessed Guardian, which likes +1/+1 counters once it transforms. The counter copy it makes of itself is better the more counters are on it. Putting a single counter on Karsus Depth Guard means that it can attack. Putting counters on Furnace Gremlin means it incubates better. Scrappy Bruiser gives you the ability to return a card that has backup to your hand if you want to trigger it again. Similarly, Scroll Shift allows you to blink a creature with backup so you get the trigger again. You've got a lot of the same rares that we already looked at. I added Guardian of Girapur here because it allows you to blink a creature, which is extra good with backup. You've also got Voldaren Thrill Seeker, a rare backup creature. Black-Red is about sacrificing things. We've got Stormclaw Rager as the main signpost uncommon. It can sacrifice things, and it does it really powerfully because it gets a counter and draws you a card, making it a pretty good deal to sacrifice things to it. Invasion of Asgol is an edict effect on the front, meaning your opponent sacks a creature or planeswalker in this case, and they lose a life. And once it transforms, it likes it if things are being killed or sacrificed because it gains a counter if a permanent was put into a graveyard from the battlefield this turn during your end step. So you've got some nice outlets and payoffs. So in addition to Stormclaw Rager and Ashen Reaper, completed Huntmaster looks like a powerhouse to me. lets you sacrifice things and incubate 3. So you sort of can create this chain of sacrificing things, which will power things like Ashen Reaper. You've got Scorn Blade Berserker, which can give another creature the ability to sacrifice when it backs it up. You have, and the bonus sheet, you have Jury, Master of the Review, who every time a permanent gets sacrificed gets a counter. You have Ichor Shade, which gets a +1/+1 counter if an artifact or creature was put into a battlefield, put into a graveyard from the battlefield this turn. Rawl's Reinforcements gives you 2 bodies, which are nice to sacrifice. And Furnace Rains is sort of the premier one. It's an uncommon, but the best thing to do is steal your opponent's thing and sacrifice it. I did not include every single sacrifice outlet here. Suffice it to say, there are several of them. Many of them are free and efficient, and Furnace Range is going to be really good when you steal your opponent's thing and sack it. Rares that work well here include Ayara, Widow of the Realm, who is the black-red transform card. She can sacrifice things on her front side for value, and when she transforms, she can bring things back for a turn. Rankle and Torbrand comes with an ability that makes both players sack creatures. Theoretically, you'll be better suited to it. Voldaren Thrillseeker lets you sacrifice creatures itself, and then the thing you back up can both be sacrificed to do damage. Judith the Scourge Diva is an incredibly strong rare for the deck that's on the bonus sheet. Buffs all of your creatures, pings things when your creatures die. Squee is going to be great to sacrifice to these sacrifice outlets as like a late game mana sink. You can just keep bringing him back and keep sacrificing things for value until your opponent's dead. Let's move now to blue-white, which is a tribal deck. It's about knights. As you can see from Marshal of Zhalfir here, buffs all of your knights, can also tap stuff. There aren't an insane number of payoffs in this set for knights, but you do have 2 really good common ones in Protocol Knight and Swordsworn Cavalier. The Protocol Knight taps things when it enters and stuns them if you control a knight. That is a really powerful upgraded effect. Swordsworn Cavalier gains first strike as long as another knight entered the battlefield. And a 3/1 with first strike can attack like all game long. You've also got another uncommon in Zhalfir and Lancer, which gets +1/+1 in Vigilance every time a knight enters the battlefield. There's really only one rare that's super well suited to this deck, and it happens to be one that's just going to be good in any deck. But it's Invasion of New Phyrexia. It makes a bunch of knight tokens, and if you can transform it, it becomes a planeswalker who has a -2 that buffs all of your knights. And our last color pair is blue-red. It is a Convoke deck that also has a spell sub-theme. Your signpost uncommon is Joyful Storm Sculptor. 5 mana 2/3 that makes 2 1/1s, and whenever you cast a spell that has Convoke, it deals 1 damage to each opponent and each battle they protect, so it can help you defeat battles, it can help ping your opponent down. You have a few nice ways to enable Convoke, in addition to having just good Convoke spells. Preening Champion gives you 2 bodies, Xerax Strobe Knight can give you 2 bodies, as can Rawl's Reinforcements. You've got some rares that work well here. Invasion of Segovia gives you a couple of bodies which are good for convoking, and if you can attack it down and transform it, you get a card that gives all of your non-creature spells convoke and untaps up to 4 creatures at your end step. Urabrask is going to be at his best here because you could potentially cast a bunch of spells in a turn, especially with the help of Convoke, which means you can transform him. Chromehost Seed Shark is going to be the best here because you're most likely to have non-creature spells and you get these extra incubator tokens. Chandra Hope's Beacon is an amazing card in any deck, but this deck will have the most spells, so it can get the most use out of the static ability and the +1. City on Fire is a rare with Convoke that I don't think is going to be super good at this point, but I thought I would include it here because it does happen to have Convoke, and it does have a powerful effect. I'm just worried that even with Convoke, it costs too much. Zephyr Singer is a rare with Convoke that's super good, though. It gives flying to the things that convoke it, and Transcendent Message is a big draw spell that has Convoke. So those are the 10 color pairs and what their main synergies are as we play this new format. If you enjoyed this video, please like it and share it. If you want to see more of my content about this new format, like my whole set review, you should see some playlists on the screen shortly. Thanks for watching.